Hey, what's happening? My name is Darius Daughtry, and I'm a poet, a playwright, director, educator, and I'm also the founder and artistic director of the Art Prevails Project. Now, what do we do with the Art Prevails Project? We use the arts, all kinds of arts, from poetry, theater, dance, visual art, and music, and we have tough conversations through our art. We create productions, shows, community events, all connected to the idea of bringing the community together, but also having conversations and exploring things that are important, the social justice or social ills or things that are bothering the community or things that are bothering various groups of people. So it only makes sense that I'm here today to check with you in regards to what you've been working on. So I know you've been working on and studying climate change and sea level rise and climate gentrification. So I'm here to help you take the ideas that you've been learning, climate gentrification, and marry it with poetry. Put it together. All right, so that's what we're here to do today. So I'm going to kind of walk you through some steps to get you to write the most amazing, the flyest, the most fire poem that you can possibly write. That's what I'm going to do. All right. So you've watched this amazing documentary. Like I watched it and it was this is the first time I had seen it and it taught me a lot. I learned a lot. Actually, one of my friends is in the documentary, and so we've spoken before. But just watching that documentary, I'm like, oh, this is really dope that they are exploring these things and having these conversations, and this is something that we really need to talk about. So you got all that information. You've looked at impact reports. You done your own research, and so now we're gonna take all that information and make it pop, put it together. So first thing is this: we got some steps to writing a poem, right? These are my steps. Now, your English teacher may say something different, but these are my steps. Me being a poet and having taught poetry for the past 10 years, this is for you. My steps for you. All right. Step one: be authentic. The idea of coming up with a great poem is not about trying to find a way to be like anybody else. This is you. You are writing this. So you've written, essays and things like that. But if you've never written a poem before, but I'm sure you have, right? It has to be you. It has to be your personality. Don't try to write like anyone else. Don't say, oh, I'm going to write this poem. It has to sound like Shakespeare. No, be authentic. And authenticity also is about your experience. So think about your own experiences and how do you put that into this poem. Step two: use your own voice. Now that's a lot like authenticity, but I wanted to impress upon the fact that you have to be original. This is your poem. You're taking the information and you're synthesizing it, putting it together. So everyone has their own, all the same information, but how do you make it yours? It doesn't have to sound like your friend next to you or your sister, your homie. It doesn't have to sound like anybody else's. This is your poem, right? So you use your voice because maybe you talk a certain way. Maybe you use certain language. Maybe you use certain terms or slang. Maybe there are things, maybe you have a native language that's not English and you can incorporate that. Use your own voice, right? But also your mind, because your voice is what's connected to your mind and your heart. So make sure that your mind and your heart are coming out as you write this poem. Step three: use precise and clear imagery, right? You want to paint the picture with your words. Now this is some real stuff. And so like the idea of climate gentrification, but just sea level rise and what's happening with our shores and our communities and what it's going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years. These are some things, some really tough, really important topics. But there's also some imagery, right? So if you're talking about things like sea level rise and the water, right? So you can use imagery to help paint the picture. So if no one has ever heard of the sea level rising and they don't really know what it's all about, they haven't watched the documentary, they haven't read the stuff that you've read, how do you paint the picture so that they can really get it, right? You're going to use words, right? So you're not going to say, oh, the water's rising. But like, how do you describe the water rising, in a way that people will not only understand it, but feel it, Because that's what poetry is about, like connecting to people's emotions and getting them to feel something. So make sure that you are painting the picture in a way that is, relatable, but also, is going to kind of capture the imagination of whoever is reading and or hearing your poem. Number 4, use sensory details, right? Super important. That's what you gotta do. And we'll get into some more of it later, but sensory details. So it's not going to connect or resonate if I can't see, hear, or kind of relate to something, as a taste, right? Not to say that, yeah, it has to be a scratch and sniff poem that you write, right? That people have to actually smell the poem. But you're going to make some references to things that people can relate to, like salt. Like if something tastes salty, right? That is a sensory detail, right? Because everybody knows what salty tastes like. So make sure you incorporate those things in your poem, right? Those are sensory details, and connect to the various senses that we all have. We all have, well, we have most senses. Some people have all, some don't, but connect to those senses so that people can be more connected to the poem that you're writing. Number 5, have fun. Have fun. So what's great about doing this here right now, I don't know, maybe you just love writing an impact report. Maybe that's your thing. Like, yo, this is fine. I'm writing this impact report. It's hot. Maybe that's your thing. But writing a poem can be and should be fun. Though this is a tough topic, it still has an opportunity to be fun, and you get to show who you are and your creativity and say things that you might not be able to say in just a normal, straightforward essay, right? So you get to have fun with it. So with it, have fun. Do your thing. Be silly if you have to, but the idea of making a point. Be extra, exaggerate, but get to the point, right? But have fun with it, right? So that's what you have to do. Those 5 steps, then you're good. All right. So now let's really get to it. So you learned a few terms, and so as we are thinking about writing this poem, there are a few of those terms that you might want to really focus on, right? The first is gentrification, right? So think about, like, you've studied that, what that actually means, like what that means to a neighborhood being gentrified, right? A certain group of people being in one place and then kind of being moved out of that place, due to economics, right? Think about that, what that means, what that looks like. And you think about that and how that compares to not only in this country, but how that's, can be applied to things around the world. The idea of a group of people and another group of people coming in, basically saying you can't live here anymore, or, we're going to, do things in a way that, you can't afford to live here anymore, right? And like, what does that mean? And how does that feel, right? And think about your own personal experience. Maybe you have, maybe you see it. So I don't know. Also, climate gentrification, right? So that's what we're talking about. So really think about, like, what does that mean, right? The climate gentrification, like, how do you take the idea of people moving in and why they're moving in, and what is that doing to people, and how does that displace people, right? And then, all these connected, right? Environmental justice, the idea of what justice is in the first place. We talk about things like liberty and justice for all. And so if we're thinking about that in a way of the environment, what does that look like? What does an environmental justice look like, right? How is there fair treatment, which is the last term? How is there fair treatment for everybody in regards to what's happening in our environment and how we relate to it and how we're able to live? So those are the terms. All right, so before we get into writing the poem, I want you to just start thinking about some things, right? Think about some things, right? What do I think about climate gentrification, right? Ask yourself that. What do I think about it? You have an opinion. Remember, at the beginning is being authentic. What do I think about climate gentrification? I got the information, right? So opinion is one thing, but I got the information. And so how do I, connect my opinion with what I've learned? Like, what do I think about it, right? Think about another question. Who is climate gentrification impacting? Think about those people. Like, who are they? What do they look like? Where do they live? Where are they from? Are they older? Are they younger? Are they, what's the wealth gap for those who are being directly impacted by climate gentrification. Ask yourself, how does the sea level rising impact me, you, me, right? Ask yourself that, right? Put yourself in the middle of it. Because oftentimes we have these discussions about things and we think about them, from a distance and how this is impacting those people or that city. Maybe I don't live in the city that they're talking about, right? But how does it in turn impact me? How can it impact me? Maybe it doesn't impact me immediately, right? But maybe how does it impact my decisions in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? How does it impact my family, my friends, people I know I care about, right? How does it impact me? Or which side may I be on? Like, ask yourself, like, what is that? Be honest with yourself. How does it impact you? Maybe it's impacting you right now. Maybe it is impacting your family right now. Maybe you live in a city that's being impacted and affected directly. So, makes you think about that. And then, ask yourself, what can be done about it? Do I think that you have all the answers? Not at all. But ask yourself, like, what can be done? If you could imagine a world where you had the power to fix it, or, you have the answers, or you could know where to get the answers, go ahead and express that. Think about what can be done. All right? All right, cool. Now, time to write a poem. Bam. Step 1. What I want you to do is take 2 minutes to just brainstorm. You take 2 minutes, right? So I want you to, we've watched the things and we've seen the dances and we've heard the people speak and we've read the stuff. Now I just want you to sit there for like 2 minutes and just jot down just whatever comes to your mind around the ideas of sea level rise and climate gentrification. Just jot them down. Don't think about it too much. Just let them. You can make it in bullet points, outline, mind map, whatever works for you, or whatever your teacher says you need to do with this. Just brainstorm and just get it out on the paper. Don't think about it too hard, but just write what you know. Be specific. If you say, oh, some cities, nah. Be specific. What cities? What places? What levels? Like, be specific, but just get everything out that you can in a brainstorming session. Don't take more than 2 minutes. All right, and just let it happen. Step 2. All right, so you brainstormed. So I want you to look at everything that you put down there. So I want you to circle some stuff or underline or star, highlight, whatever works for you, right? And what stands out to you, or what seems interesting to you, or what is something that you may think like, oh, I want to explore this more, or I can do something with this, yeah, like what, like go ahead and do that. Like look through your list and see the things that pop out, because you can't write about everything, right? You can, I guess, but that'll be a 40-page poem, and you want to read that? I mean, I like long poems, but not 40 pages, unless it's like the Odyssey. But anyway, go ahead and highlight some things that you can pull out and focus on. Not to say that, like, if you choose 2 or 3 things that you think you want to focus on, that you can't make reference to those other things that you listed, because you will. Because if that's what you know about the topic, you're going to utilize those, but maybe you'll be able to take some things, specific things, and like focus on those things and make that the core of your piece. All right, so now we're going to start writing, right? So it's just that. Just start. But remember that this is a first draft of a poem. A first draft, there are no rules. There, you don't have to think about it sounding a certain way. Don't take all your time trying to make it sound perfect or sound super amazing. Just let it kind of come out. Just take your time. Use the information, from the definitions we have, from your own personal experiences, from the documentary, from the impact report, from the other things that you've read or seen, from the dance, what people were saying in with the dance video, or whatever. Use like discussions you've had in class. Use those things and just start to write, right? Start to write. And people often ask, like, how do you start a poem? There is no surefire way to start a poem, but if I was to give you some tips, maybe start with an image, right? Start with an image. If you're talking about water rising, right, you can start with an image like, imagine a city under sea. That's an image. Don't use that. If you use that, you owe me. But now you've got it in an image, right? So go ahead and maybe use an image, or you can use a quote. Use a quote, or use a statistic, right? you got a lot of stats, so you can go back and look at the documentary or look at some of the information and pull a stat and say, okay, this is start there. That you can start that poem with a statistic. All right, that's a way. But just remember that no matter what, it's a first draft. It does not have to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect unless you're like a savant and you're just the most amazing poet in the world. It's not going to be perfect, right? So don't worry about being perfect. Just get it out and see how it comes. Have fun with it. Again, back to having fun. Don't rack your brain trying to make, oh man, this has to be the best poem ever in the world. No, just kind of get it out. But incorporate those things. Look at your list that you've made, that you brainstormed. Look at any notes that you've taken and see what you can put that to help strengthen the poem. Step 4. You get to add some flavor. You've written your first draft, and maybe you're just great and a lot of the flavor came out because you write poems already, or you just have a natural knack for it. So that might be you. But you get to add some flavor as you go look through your draft now. Now, what does that mean? That means you're going to add, metaphors and similes. You're going to use hyperbole, right? So if you don't, know what a metaphor or simile is, I'm sure you do by now, but you're just going to make these comparisons. How do you help the reader connect to what you're saying? Going back to what we talked about before, how do you help, the reader, right? So if we were talking about, say, again, going back to sea level rising, right? So if you're like, what else rises? So maybe you think about other things that rise. So inflation, like prices of gas rise, bread being baked rises, an angry parent's temperature rises, just the temperature in South Florida in the summer rises, right? So you can use things to make these comparisons, like the sea level rising to these things rising, right? A hot air balloon, right? Or whatever. You can do this. So use those things. Like as you're describing things, don't just stick to just like straight description. Utilize a metaphor here, simile there, and hyperbole. Hyperbole is exaggeration. And what's crazy about this is like a lot of it you don't really have to exaggerate because a lot of it is so drastic. So it may even sound like you're exaggerating when you're not really exaggerating, but you can use hyperbole. Again, back to sensory details, smells, right? Smell is a strong one. And so, what's a smell that you can refer to? Or sounds, when you talk about people and places, right? You talk about culture. Right, and this, talking about here in Miami, it's a lot of these communities that have strong, rich culture, strong, rich Caribbean cultures that are being impacted. And so, what are the sounds and smells and tastes that come from those areas, those cultures? So you can include those things. And remember, your voice drives the poem. So you get to add who you are, your flavor, your own experiences, your culture, your slang, everything you want to add to it that is you, that is personally you and not anybody else's, you get to add it. All right, last step, you clean it up, you check it for errors, you make sure that it's cool, you make sure that you've gone through and you've said, all right, I've used all the words I wanted to use and made them as powerful as I possibly can make them. Right, so sometimes in a poem we end up explaining too much. Use words. Just give us some powerful images and some ideas. You don't have to explain. That's what a poem does. It doesn't explain. It just shows, and it allows the reader or the listener to fill in the blanks, to make interpretations and such. So that's what it is. And make sure that the poem finishes with a strong, powerful image or thought. Now, that doesn't have to be like something crazy, right? Sometimes it is something that is like the power doesn't necessarily have to be like strong, like, oh, scary, but it's something that makes the reader or the listener think or feel, ponder, or whatever, right? So it does all those things. So you always want to make sure that you leave a little something and not just end with, well, that's why you have to stop climate gentrification. Like, nah, that's not what we're going to do. That's not what you're going to do, right? You're going to give us something that is oomph at the end, right? It's up to you what that is. Maybe it's another quote, maybe it's a stat, maybe it's just a thought, maybe it's you paint a picture of the future and what a future could look like, or maybe you ask a question at the end, right? So you get to decide what that looks like for you, all right? So once you've done all that and you've gone through and added your flavor and made it yours and it's hot, you get to share it. Pass it to your friends or share it in class, and then when you're done, bars. Just say bars because you got bars, right? Because you're a poet. That's what poets have, bars. So before you go ahead and just start writing everything, I'm gonna show you an example. Let me give you an example of what you might be able to do. Now, these are two talented young men that work with me with Art Prevails Project, Marnino and Zaire, and they are going to show you a little bit of something that they can do. So check it out.
Does no one find it odd the way we took it upon ourselves to tax each other for what Mother Nature freely gave? Maybe the winds of change rage on her behalf. Do you not find her wrath justified? Maybe the tides turned on us when we turned our backs on anyone below the lines we drew. The audacity to presume we have the right to decide a cost of living as if labor pains want payment in full. Does no one find it odd the way gentrification and colonization share the same stink? How there's always an excuse for invasion, leaving crop circles in places they find easy to overtake. There's a flood happening way past the coastlines, cost of living rising, while families are up to their neck in bills, communities sinking while the wealthy run from water. Ironic, isn't it, how we liken to liken, how we show new faces with the phases of the moon. We assume a form more beast than benevolent. It's common for wolves to take sheep's clothes, only now they've upgraded to homes. The rest forced to pack as if their only purpose in life was beta testing. This must be what it feels like to be preyed on. Prayers gone unheard while your herd is consumed. There's no church in the wild, just urban developers promising things they would never do. Call it beautification, but what say you of those who are moved? You can't blame the water for washing out the natives when the storm is you.
And that is an example of what you can do. Maybe your teacher will allow you to go ahead and connect with another partner, and two of you can write the poem together, just like that, maybe. Or maybe you just do it by yourself, and it'll still be hot. So, again, have fun, say something powerful, something important, do your thing, be creative, be open, use your voice, strong imagery, paint the picture, and give us something great.